Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green-white ride. Hey folks, this is Eric. Real quick before we start the show, we recorded these a little bit in advance, and it turns out since we made the recording, Wisconsin made a late addition to the roster, adding a 6'10", 250-pound Italian big named Riccardo Greppi. Originally ticketed for Temple, but instead decided to take the last available spot in Madison. Kind of a finesse player, more than his size indicates. He's 18, it's a developmental project, and it's not someone we see as an immediate contributor, but we just wanted, for completeness sake, to mention him when we put the show out. So now, on to the show. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here, continuing our march through the Big Ten. Today, we continue with the traditional Big Ten teams again, with the number 13 Wisconsin Badgers. Despite being a perennial basket case for the better part of a half century, Wisconsin turned its athletic program around into a pest, both on the football field and the hardwood. And so the question is, what about this year? So a quick reminder for those that for only $1 a week, you can help support the show, keep us rolling with every game, pre- and post-game analysis, recruiting updates, interviews with media figures and players, so much more. If you think we're worth at least $1, we'd appreciate your support by heading over to the support page at tffinots.com/support. You can find the necessary links there. And also, we will be having the Beat Rod contest again. So you have to predict the Big Ten final standings, 1 through 18. $100 gift certificate to Nudge Printing, which you can get some great Spartan apparel, or I guess non-Spartan apparel if you want. You can get that if you email me, Eric, E-R-I-C, at tffinots.com. That's again with 1 through 18. The tiebreaker this year is how many points Michigan State scores against Michigan. And reminder that they play twice. All right, so Wisconsin, I feel like we have this kind of conversation a little bit every year. So respectable, less than fully satisfying season for the Badgers. They went 22-14 last year, 11-9 in the Big Ten, which every team was between like 12-8 to 8-12, I think, last year. But that what's notable about the 11-9 final record is they were 8-1 to start the year. So they went 3-8 over the last 11 games. And then had a pretty good Big Ten tournament run. They made it all the way to and actually won the Big Ten tournament, didn't they?
Yep.
And Greg Gard sort of been almost getting fired or run out of town, maybe, sort of. We're not quite sure. People are kind of upset with him, not upset. It's hard to know, but he just seems to be doing just enough to keep working. He's won a couple of Big Ten titles. He won a Big Ten tournament title, like I mentioned last year. He's been in the NCAA tournament 6 years, but it just does not seem like the same kind of Wisconsin success, but maybe in some ways it's Wisconsin's success that we sort of gotten used to, but it's just different. Where before they kind of won the same way, and now they're sort of winning maybe slightly different ways, but I don't know. I mean, they're a hard team to sort of figure out.
Yeah, and I think, we just in our previous episode, we were talking a lot about coaching expectations with Graham McCaffrey at Iowa and kind of the ebb and flow of program history in Iowa. And Wisconsin is a very different story because for the first 20 years, as opposed to Iowa, the first 20 years of my paying attention to this stuff, Iowa was generally a pretty good program and sometimes a little better. Wisconsin, you could generally pencil them in for ninth.
Yeah.
You could always put Northwestern 10th, and you could put Wisconsin 9th, and the vast majority of the time, you'd have at least those two spots nailed. And then Dick Bennett got there and gradually raised expectations, got them to a Final Four. And then he was replaced by Bo Ryan, who really took things to another level. And, anybody who saw the entirety of Bo Ryan's tenure at Wisconsin saw the greatest period of Wisconsin basketball in history. I mean, that's not even debatable.
Easily, yeah.
You had two Final Fours, one national title game appearance. I don't know how many Big Ten titles. Have to go back and look, but I'm guessing probably at least maybe 4, I would think. And they seem to always be top 4, like never out of the top. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's accurate. I don't think Bo Ryan ever finished out of the top 4. So the standard for Greg Gard to meet in replacing his mentor was very, very high.
Yeah.
And yet you look at the track record, he's won Big Ten titles 25% of the time. That's not
No,
bad.
that's pretty good.
In a 14-team league, that's not bad. He's been to the NCAA tournament 6 out of 8 years, 75% of the time. In the modern era, that's, especially with the volatility in terms of rosters, that's not bad.
Yep.
But the problem is he's never had a great season. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
Bo Ryan, for a while, the knock on Bo Ryan was, well, he has great Big Ten regular seasons, but his teams don't do anything in the NCAA tournament. That was the knock on him for a long time. And then late in his career, he had that team with Kaminsky and Decker and those guys, and they went to back-to-back Final Fours and then to a national title game. That changed the final narrative on Bo Ryan, Greg Gard, I think, has done, I'm not going to say he's had a brilliant tenure in Madison, but he's done a pretty good job. And yet we talked about, my not really, and I could be wrong about this, but I'm not really picking up on a lot of fan base discontent with Fran McCaffrey. There's tons of it with Greg Gard. And it has to do with a couple things. It has to do with expectations that are a function of what Bo Ryan did when he was in the job there. In particular, what Bo Ryan did toward the end of his tenure. That's the thing. Bo Ryan kind of went out on top. The last image he left that fan base with was of the most success they'd ever seen across the board. Like they were a legitimate powerhouse nationally for those couple of years. And so that's what Greg Gard is competing against. He's not competing against Dick Bennett. He's not competing against all the legions of coaches before Dick Bennett who were unmitigated failures, including Stan Van Gundy, NBA fans, for one brief season. So it's tough, and I feel sympathy for him because Greg Gard, to me, has seemed to be a decent guy. But then again, the other reason why there's been some fan discontent is that there has been volatility with their roster, and not so much this offseason, but in some previous off seasons, there have been guys who seemed from the outside to be doing just fine, leave that program and have a lot of problems with the way that they were coached. So I'm not obviously neither one of us are anywhere close to being inside things in Madison. It's hard to know because a lot of times when people leave, it's obviously because they're unhappy, but you don't know that you're actually getting a fair response as to the general state of things within the program, right? You could be getting sour grapes.
Yeah.
But I do think there's been enough of it that you have to at least consider the possibility that there are some issues there. But again, through all of that, he's done what I think has to fairly be called at least a solid job. I think last year was particularly unsatisfying for that fan base, though, because of what you mentioned. They had that 8-1 start in the league, and that had not been the expectation. I certainly didn't expect them. I didn't expect them to be bad, but I didn't expect them to be quite that good. And I didn't ever actually think they were that good. I had a feeling they were going to come back to earth, and I remember talking about it here, that they're 8-1. And I'd have to go back and refresh my memory, but if I recall correctly, I think they were winning a lot of close games. It seemed like a lot of breaks were going their way, and so it wasn't difficult to imagine that things were going to start tilting the other direction as things tend to even out over time. And that's exactly what happened. I think where they finished was actually pretty reflective of what they were. A slightly above average Big Ten team, which means you're a pretty good team on a national level, but you're not great.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they were. So I think the question becomes now, this guy has seemed to be on the ropes a couple different times over his 8 years, but he's managed to do enough to hold on to that job. I think if he had a long run in March, that would give him a little more security. And probably until he does that, there's some tension around that idea. He's only been out of the first weekend twice, and both of those times it ended with Sweet 16 losses.
Yeah.
So he's yet to have that real breakthrough. I think if he does manage to do that, that maybe changes perceptions a little bit. But unless and until he does, it's probably going to be this sort of feeling every year.
Well, I feel like with Wisconsin, I mean, as you mentioned, they were just terrible forever. And then with Bennett came around, they were a very defensive-minded, hyper low-scoring team, ultra-long possessions. I think the shot clock was longer back then too, I think. I can't recall.
It was.
Yeah. So that they were able to
35.
They were able to really limit possessions. And then Bo Ryan was just sort of Dick Bennett on steroids, and it was just, even more so. And then he finally got enough offensive capability to really be effective with that defensive approach.
Bo Ryan, in fairness, Bo Ryan had extremely efficient offenses.
Well, yes.
They didn't play fast. They played a very slow pace. The pace was not very different than Bennett. The system and the approach and the efficiency was.
Yeah.
Bo Ryan's teams were definitely better. I mean, I liked Dick Bennett a lot as a coach, but that was real. Dick Bennett was slugfest basketball.
Yeah.
I mean, that was something else. Bo Ryan's teams had more skill.
With programs like Wisconsin, or I think Northwestern's a good example, you almost need to do something unorthodox in order to sort of get out of your endless cycle. And I think Bennett was the solution for that. Bo Ryan sort of took that and, adapted it to his way, but it was still similar. And guard has been a further evolution of away from that, the way they played. But the question is whether he can keep doing it. I guess whether he can be effective at sort of what he's doing now.
But I want to make you touched on something really interesting, because I have perceived for quite a while that some of the tension within that fan base is that, Wisconsin's become a decent talent producing state, better than it used to be. Like the city of Milwaukee in that area produces more Big Ten caliber players than say 30, 40 years ago, I think. And sometimes that talent has just flat out ignored the University of Wisconsin, because if you are an athletic player, someone who wants to play fast, Wisconsin is probably fairly and correctly not viewed as a good option. And so I think there are some Wisconsin fans that are frustrated by the idea that there are certain types of very good players that they just can't get. And they're right.
Sure.
And Greg Gard's tenure has not changed that. So, and when they've gotten guys like AJ Storr, who we'll talk about in a second, who kind of cut against that standard Wisconsin narrative, it doesn't tend to last long.
Yeah.
They've had some guys like that come in, try to make it work, and then be frustrated and leave. So that is part of the underlying story within that program, though, and why there's tension with certain parts of the fan base. I think Bo Ryan won at such a level that you just couldn't argue. You might have hated watching them play, and been upset that some of the guys you weren't able to get, are because of that reason, but you couldn't really argue with the success. Guard is just in that sweet spot where if you're a Wisconsin fan who's frustrated by those things, you can credibly formulate an argument that goes along the lines of, we would be better off if we had a different coach with a different approach so we could get these kind of athletes to come into our program. Because guard's not contending for Final Fours.
Right. Well, and I think that's the difference. That was sort of my point, that when as far as the evolution from Bo Ryan, he still somewhat has a similar-ish system, or at least the way that pace of play and everything.
He absolutely does.
But it's a little bit more open than Bo Ryan was. But can you still be successful playing largely with players who fit into the previous system and add a guy like sprinkle somebody in like AJ Storr and be successful? Or not, because maybe you have the opportunity to get those players, but you have to show that there's a place for them to work it within your system. And if you open your system up enough, now it's changed. Can you continue feeding players in there, or are you going to just be stuck with a system that doesn't work for anybody? And I don't know. I'm not quite sure what the answer to that is.
Any player who wants to play fast-paced basketball, and by the way, that's just the truth. Sure. If you look at what high school kids, the top 100 kids say, the vast majority of them are somewhere in there going to talk about how they want to play someplace that they can play freely and play fast. That is what makes Wisconsin a tough sell.
Right.
And again, it's one thing if you're winning consistently in a big level with a system that doesn't do that, it's hard to argue with it. But when you're not quite at that level of performance, it becomes tougher to defend. And I think that's the line that guard has been living on for a while. And it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
And so, to some extent, it's not really fair because the guy, look, by now he's been there 8 years. This is no longer, he's not winning with Bo Ryan's players. He's done it himself. There are a lot of schools in the Big Ten and elsewhere that would absolutely trade their last 8 years for what Greg Gard has done at Wisconsin. So it's somewhat unfair to him, but at the same time, I do get it. I understand it.
All right, so let's talk about the players for Wisconsin, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. As Wisconsin cleans house, make sure your house is clean and up and spick and span. You can check out the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They can take care of your windows, obviously. They squeegee your windows. And unlike most places, they don't just sit back on the bottom of the ladder and just kind of spray things up there. They actually get up on the ladder right up next to the house when they're either using the power washer or whether they're up on your windows. And it's meticulous. They clean the blinds, and the stuff that they did with our house, I don't think our blinds had ever been that clean. They get the screens, which I don't know. If you clean your windows, how many of you are cleaning your screens? Probably not many. So they get everything really nice and clean, so it's really bright to get in your house. And so, again, you can't go wrong with the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They're so good, they were even asked by the state of Michigan to clean the Capitol building. So they are the ones to call. You can find their contact information on our support page, 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate at this. That's at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. So the big player, as you alluded to earlier, AJ Storr, a dynamic player, kind of surprising. I don't think anyone expected him to do quite what he did when he came last year. He transferred from St. John's, but he averaged 16.8 points a game, almost 4 rebounds a game, shot 43, 32, and 81. He ended up leaving and heading with a bunch of cash down to Kansas. And so he has played for about every team, I think, in the country at this point. How many Division I teams are left, but he's heading on, and it's not a big surprise that he's leaving, but a little, again, surprising how effective he was last year. And he did fade a little bit down the end, and I don't know if that's a tired leg thing or something, but anyway, he was not quite the player at the end that he was the middle season part of the year or early the Big Ten season when they were just tearing people up.
Well, if you remember, we had Coach Mike Garland on with us fairly early in Big Ten play. And we talked about AJ Storr, and he had, I think it was either a preview or a post-game little Wisconsin matchup. And he had said that he thought AJ Storr was the most pro-ready
Yeah, right.
of any one of the Big Ten. Well, that didn't end up happening to pan out. He went into the draft, got evaluated, opted to come back to school and transfer to Kansas. But I understand, and I think it was defensible at the time he said it, because up to that point, he was really playing well. There was definitely a drop-off in the second half of Big Ten play. And I think that had a lot to do with why Wisconsin's 8-1 start didn't sustain, is that AJ Storr was merely a good player, not a dominant one, the way he was early. Now, you look at those numbers, 43-32 from 2 and or overall and from 3. That's not great. But there were points in the season where he was much better.
Yes, much better, yeah.
And you could see the potential for him to be a dominant player on the way. No question about that. But losing him, you're losing a lot in terms of production. There's no argument there. But then I look at some other things. This is the 7th school, counting high school. So he's entering his 3rd year of college basketball, and then he had 4 years of high school. This is the 7th school he's attended in 7 years, Kansas will be. You have to wonder at a certain point if having players with that kind of track record becomes a net negative for the program, even if they produce at the level that somebody like Storr did. I mean, it'll be interesting to see him. I don't expect Kansas to struggle. I mean, Kansas is the likely, I believe, preseason number 1 for a reason, because they got a ton of talent, and he's part of that. But you do wonder if it's the best for that team and for any team he's been on. When you're at 7 schools in 7 years, to me, that's enough for track record that says something about you. Now, it could be different somethings, but it says something that suggests that you're not maybe locked in at any given place the way you would hope to be. And it certainly would give anyone who was coaching you reason to think that you might not be fully bought in, and that has implications, it can, at least, in terms of the way you play, in terms of the chemistry with teammates, all of that stuff. When things were really humming for Wisconsin, it seemed like it was a great fit. But I think the back half of last season, I sensed that they didn't look to me like a team that was enjoying themselves playing together. And I think this is all part of it. So, look, I think obviously AJ Storr sticking around for another year in Wisconsin would, on balance, have been a better thing for them. But I do think that there are downsides that come with someone who has his track record. It'll be interesting to see what he does in Kansas, because he's not going to be the focal point. He'll be important, but, you would think Hunter Dickinson will be option A there, and they have some other guys too. It will not be the way it was for him in Madison last year. He was clearly the guy, and so how does he react to that? We'll see.
Another player looking to transfer out is 6'1" point guard Chucky Hepburn. He was rumored to have ready to leave last year and head to either Nebraska or Creighton, because he's originally from Omaha. He elected to stay, and then this year he decided to take off and head over to Louisville. He averaged 9.2 points a game on 43, 32, and 74 shooting. He was 3.9 assists to just 1 point turnovers a game, so very good decision maker. And I think he was part of the reason that the number of Michigan State fans were concerned about Freddie Fiddler, not Frankie. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying Freddie. Frankie Fiddler was going to end up at Louisville because he was a former teammate of Chucky Hepburn. Of course, he ended up at Michigan State. So Hepburn is gone, and I guess at this point you can't really put too much into people transferring out, because I think before you could say, well, this person's not able to hang on to their players, but but in this era, it's kind of hard to make those assumptions, I think.
Well, as you mentioned, there was a lot of talk about this the year prior, and then it didn't happen. And then you look at the season Hepburn had, and you have to wonder if there was maybe some buyer's remorse on both sides, because his level of play was a tick down from where he had been as a sophomore. I think if you're a Wisconsin fan, the question you're asking yourself is, okay, we're replacing Chucky Hepburn, but which Chucky Hepburn?
Right.
If it's a Chucky Hepburn when he was a sophomore, well, he's a pretty good player. If it's last year's edition, you're maybe less concerned. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, with as much noise as there was around him leaving, it seems like it was inevitable. And this gets back to what I was talking about, this kind of knock. You're right that in the current environment, you can't really knock a coach for losing guys in the portal because everybody does. But specifically with guard, this is one that I think plays into some of those things that have been talked about. Guys that want to play a little more freely. I guess my response to that is, well, if you're a recruit and you haven't bothered to investigate and understand what system it is you're going to be playing in, who's that really on?
Yeah.
I don't believe that Greg Gard is out there telling anybody he's recruiting, look, for you, we're going to loosen the reins and it's just basically going to be read-react. I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah.
So who spouts that, you know?
We'll go on to Tyler Wall, 6'7", a wing. He was a guy who was a problem for Michigan State occasionally, although it seemed like he was injured a couple of times. We would play him, and so we always had the advantage.
When he was able to play.
So kind of unfortunate for him, he's had lots of injuries. But he averaged 10.6 points a game, 5.4 rebounds a game, shot 54, 19, and 66. So, I mean, there's the obvious real hole in his game. Unable to hit outside much except just like air. He was bad from three, but played hard and really good, good inside post player. He's able to even penetrate occasionally too. I thought he was okay with the ball.
Yeah, look, he became a very, very solid player for Wisconsin, and the type of which we've seen a lot of over the years. I would describe him as like a B- version of Ethan Happ.
Yeah.
Who had very similar strengths and weaknesses. Very, very good in the post, excellent passer, but completely unable to hit a jumper. And the difference, why Happ was a better player, is he was 2 inches taller. But Wall was a solid guy when he was healthy. So it's a loss. And he was a leader and a guy who brought some toughness, some physicality, some effort. So that'll be missed for sure.
Yeah, and I think he was good defensively too. So which most of the players in Wisconsin are good defensively. So the puzzling player go to next is Connor Sejan. So 6'4" wing. As a freshman, boy, he looked like he was going to be quite a player because he averaged 11.7 points a game, 40, 36, and 88 shooting. And I remember turning to some Wisconsin fans who were sitting next to us at the Big Ten tournament. And I'm like, why is Connor Sejan not playing anymore? And they're like, yeah, he can't hit anything. And so he went down to 7 minutes a game, only 3.2 points a game, shooting 39, 30, and 91. And so he has opted to transfer into Nebraska and just try his hand there and see if he can get things back on track. Because, I mean, clearly the shooting was there. It's not like people weren't guarding him his freshman year, but he had all kinds of trouble last year at Wisconsin.
It's very rare you see a fall off like this. Because he went from being a guy who wasn't highly regarded. He was a kid out of Indiana. I think Wisconsin was his only high major offer, if I remember correctly. Then bursts onto the scene when they needed some help on the wing. Has a great freshman year. Looks like he's going to be the latest in a line of Wisconsin wings of that sort. You know, with good size, really good shooter, mental toughness. He seemed to have all of that. One difference, and I think one thing that hurt him, is the Sejan, unlike some of the other guys Wisconsin has had over the years, was not a particularly strong defender. And so when his shooting went in the bag, there was nothing else. There was no other reason to play him, and I think that's part of what hurt him. But last year, it's hard to know what was going on because he was hurt in the offseason. Took him a while to get back. And then when he did, his confidence just seemed to be shot. I mean, as much as the drop in numbers tells you what happened, the drop in playing time went from 27 minutes a game as a freshman. I'm sorry. 27 minutes a game as a freshman to 7. That is dramatic. And so again, it's hard to understand. Now, he, as opposed to some of these other guys we talked about, I don't think he's a guy who you look at and say, well, this is just a guy who's a bad fit for what Wisconsin wants to do. I don't think it's that. I have to think it was whatever went on behind the scenes that led to that reduction in role, whether it was guard being unfair to him or that was just a Seagen's perception, whatever it was. But really a wild swing in terms of performance and role of the program. As you say, he's going to start over at Nebraska.
Next will be Isaac Lindsey, 6'5" guard. Didn't play a whole lot, so he's heading down, transferring down to South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits.
Yeah, simple as that. Lindsey was never able to carve out a role, so he's going down a level and probably the right moves.
And finally, for the players leaving the team, is Gus Yalden. He's a 5 who is pretty big, but he just needed to kind of work on his body. Never really saw the floor. Seemed to kind of get going with guard. He also had some problems with alcohol and pot possession incidents. Had a problem with a scooter, which led to a week suspension. Redshirted, and he's headed to Seton Hall to try and restart things in the Big East.
I thought he couldn't have been paired more perfectly than him coming to play at Wisconsin. He played prep basketball at LaLue in Indiana, and so I saw him a little bit. I think, trying to remember, he may have been a teammate for a year with Jeremy Fears, but in any event, he played there. He's a Wisconsin native too. And he just seemed very similar in a lot of ways to Jackson Kohler, except he was in worse shape. He needed more of and we know Jackson's obviously done a lot to reshape his body, but Yalden needed it more, but still, just great footwork and low post skills. And that program has made a living off guys like that. So I just figured, well, this is a match made in heaven. But he just never got it together. He immediately, when he got to campus, had alcohol and pot possession incidents. Then he had whatever this problem was, which was ill-defined with a scooter, which led to a week suspension. I think that probably had something to do with an altercation with, public safety or police. And so then he never played. He redshirted the entire season, and then decided to transfer to Seton Hall. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to him at Seton Hall, because I really thought this was a guy who was going to be a very, very good player at Wisconsin, and it's obviously not going to happen.
We'll go into the returning players. Do we have any COVID players on Michigan State's team this year? I don't think there are any. Are there?
There are not, because the two guys who were eligible to do that departed.
Yeah, AJ and
they are playing their Madi and AJ are playing their COVID seasons at Cal and Vandy.
Yeah, I can't say I'm sad to see the COVID year go away after this year. It'd be nice to kind of get things to sort of regular sort of turnover. But that means we're going to see a couple of COVID players, and the first one will begin with Stephen Kroll, a 7-foot fifth-year player who was a Spartan killer his first visit in East Lansing, which I think had fire coming out of your ears after watching that game. He averaged 11.2 points a game, 7.3 rebounds a game, shot 56, 45, and 74. So he's definitely one huge improvement last year was his outside shooting was excellent and made him a lot more difficult because he's very good also right around the rim too. So he's
absolutely. It again, this is most of the time. This is the template Wisconsin works with the bigs. They want guys who have size, who can be effective around the rim in the low post, and then gradually over their careers, you see them extend their shooting. Sometimes with guys like Happ or Wall, that last part never ends up happening. But usually it does. We can go on and on the number of guys Wisconsin's had over Bo Ryan's tenure into Greg Gard's who have fit the same mold that Stephen Kroll is in. But yeah, 45% from three, that's tough. It's tough to deal with when you're talking about a 7-footer who can then take you down to the blocks and work you there too. Very good player, and he's gotten steadily better over time. So I would expect a strong final year from him. He's a big man who can can really do it inside and out, and he's also become a solid rebounder.
Another player I really like is Max Klesmit, 6'4", fifth-year wing. He averaged a little under 10 points a game on 44, 40, and 82 shooting. Good secondary ball handler, good defender. He is, I guess, your stereotypical Wisconsin player. And I think he was the one who came up. I think he's the one who scored the winning basket against Purdue in the Big Ten tournament. It's funny, I can't remember. I was just there, but I feel like he had the bucket.
I think you're right.
He's very good.
He's when I was talking a minute ago about a Sejan not quite fitting the standard Wisconsin wing mold in that he's really only an effective offensive player. Klesmit's a guy who does it both ends. And so he's entering his third year in the program. And again, with him, the first year he was there to last year, you saw steady improvement. He's just a solid all-around player. Nothing, he's not spectacular in any one way, but just is going to give you good, solid production. He's going to make good decisions. He's going to hit threes, and he's going to defend.
John Blackwell, 6'4", sophomore. He's part of the reason you didn't see the court much because he became a really good player as a freshman. He averaged 8 points a game and 3.2 rebounds a game in 19 minutes. He shot 45, 46, and 82. Also brought some athleticism that they definitely needed on that team.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Product of Birmingham, Brother Rice. He has Big Ten genes. His father, Glenn Blackwell, played at Illinois in the early 80s and was a very good player there on some very good Illini teams. John Blackwell, it's interesting. He was never the headline guy at Brother Rice. The Brother Rice teams he played on, they never won a state title. That's I would say it's fair to say they kind of underachieved a little bit during his time there, but he had other high major recruits as teammates, and he never seemed to get the attention that his talent probably merited. Same was true in AAU. But that said, it wasn't as if national recruiting guys saw through it either, because he wasn't recruited, wasn't ranked, I should say, very highly. I don't know that he was even inside the top 100, but boy, did he prove all that wrong. And I do know there were people around the state of Michigan who were very convinced that John Blackwell was going to be an outstanding college player. So it was not a total surprise to me. I'd heard it enough from people who generally know what they're talking about. And he made good on all of that. You're right in that he's got a bit of a profile athletically that's not the standard. Klesmit looks more like a standard Wisconsin player. Blackwell has another gear to him. And I think in time, if they're patient and he's patient, he's an interesting guy in that I don't think it's true that a guy who has better than average athletic ability is wasting his time at Wisconsin. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they have to be the right player, though. They have to be a guy who's patient enough and skilled enough to do the things that system is going to require of you. And then that allows their athleticism. I think about somebody like Sam Decker on their Final Four team. Sam Decker was 6'9" for starters, but he was also a very, very good athlete. He was a great college player because of that, because he had all the elements that allowed him to be effective and trusted by the coaching staff in Wisconsin, but yet he also had this athletic ability that took him up another gear. John Blackwell, different size player, different kind of player, but I could see a similar package. I think that the interesting thing with him is his efficiency numbers were outstanding. 45, 46, 82. As a freshman, that's incredible. I think this year it's virtually a lock he'll be a starter. And I would also expect with Storr gone, you're going to see a lot more usage for him. So the question is, how much does that increase in usage affect his efficiency? I think over the long run, he's likely to be a very, very good player no matter what. But I think for this season, that to me is the big issue. How easily does he handle becoming much more of a focal point and playing a bigger role? That's always the question when you're in a situation like his.
Moving on to the 5 spot, we get to Nolan Winter, 6'11", 220-pound sophomore who emerged last year as the backup for Kroll. He averaged 2.4 points a game and 1.8 rebounds a game in about 10 minutes. He shot 42, 31, and 7. He can move pretty well, so potential, I suppose, to play the 4 as well. And future looks bright for this kid for sure.
Well, I think, he's going to be the next guy. I thought, and this is the thing, historically in Wisconsin's program, big men don't make a big immediate impact. Cole, for example, was in a battle early on with another guy who was in his same class. And it was unclear in an early stage as to which one was likely to win out and take on a bigger role. Over time, that got sorted out. And that's often what happens. Guys will often redshirt, or they'll just play sparingly early on. And then over time, as they mature, they get a bigger and bigger role. Last year, because of the roster, it seemed likely that a freshman would inherit at least a decent reserve role. And Yalden was the guy I expected to be that player. He was more highly rated. He had a bigger profile. Winter is the guy who actually won out, and maybe not entirely for basketball reasons, but once he actually started playing, you could actually see a pretty good case for it in basketball terms too. He looks like the next guy in the assembly line. I mean, when Cole leaves after this season, Nolan Winter is next in line. He's big at 6'11", 220. He's got room to get bigger, and I think they'll try to get him a little stronger. 31% from 3 is not spectacular, but he was 70% at the line. To me, that suggests there's room for growth. And remember, as recently as last season, year before last, Cole was right around a 30% shooter from 3, and then he jumps on the mid-40s last year. So I think that's probably, you could bet on some type of evolution in that regard from Winter. And he's even athletically, he's capable of playing the 4, so I wouldn't rule out his being a starter. But regardless of what happens, he's going to play a significant role, and he's probably the next guy in line.
Moving along to another fifth-year senior, Carter Gilmore, 6'7", 220-pounder, averaged 1.8 points a game, 1.4 rebounds a game in 9 minutes, shot 45, 25, and 79. So clearly a role player reserve.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, he's a guy that he's limited, mostly makes an impact via his effort and toughness. So there's always use for that in Wisconsin's thing, but I don't see his role increasing a ton. I would think, he gets passed by guys like Winter who can do more, but he's still going to play some.
Then Marcus Ilver, 6'8", senior from Estonia, averaged 1.1 points a game and 1.3 rebounds a game in 6 minutes.
Yeah, deep front court reserve. He's been in the program a long time, and he hasn't had a breakthrough yet. So barring catastrophic injuries, I think it's a similar role for him, very limited.
And finally, backup point guard Kamari McGee, 6-foot senior, averaged 2.1 points a game on 54, 27, and 61 shooting in just 8 minutes a game.
Yeah, and look, there's an open spot at the point with Hepburn leaving. So theoretically, McGee has a chance, but my guess is that he kind of stays in that 8 to 10 minute a game reserve role that he's been in.
Moving on to newcomers, we'll start with Cameron Hunter, 6'3" transfer from Central Arkansas. Has 2 years left to play. He averaged a little under 17 points a game on 42, 31, and 79 shooting, with a 3.9 to 2.8 assist-to-turnover ratio and 5 rebounds a game.
Yeah, interesting player. He sat out the entirety of last season due to injury.
What was injured?
He had a foot injury.
A foot injury? What?
Yeah, I know. It doesn't happen. Right. How can that happen to anybody outside of East Lansing? The expectation is that he's going to be 100% recovered. And before that, he was a 2-time Atlantic Sun All-Conference choice. So there's talent here. You have to like his size at that position at 6'3", at the point. There are things to like, but I think it's fair to wonder just how smooth the transition will be, because his perimeter shooting numbers were not great at Central Arkansas, and 3.9 to 2.8 in assisted turnovers.
That's not Wisconsin-ish.
It's not Wisconsin-ish. It's not great. I think Hunter's going to play regardless, but I do think it's an open question as to whether he's the starter because of the next guy we're going to talk about.
So the next guy we're going to talk about, Daniel Freitag from Minnesota. He's also got some D1 football offers, including at Wisconsin. He's definitely a point guard, 6'3", good size, obviously very very good athletically. So is this the guy you think is going to be the starter for the season?
Well, here's what's interesting. Normally, you would say a guy with multiple years, like, 3 years already under his belt at the collegiate level, would be a safer bet to be a sounder decision maker than a true freshman, right? That would be the standard. But the belief in Madison, best as I can tell, is that the Freitag might actually be better and more mature in terms of his decision making. And in Wisconsin's system, that will go a long way. And the bonus is that with Freitag, it's not as if you're making this choice. Well, do I go with a guy who's not going to make mistakes but has a lower ceiling? Because Freitag is supposedly like an eye-popping athlete. And you mentioned he was a high-level football player, but they say he can really get up. He's quick. He's strong. Like, this is a guy who has real potential to give them something, another gear at that position that they haven't often had. They've sometimes had guys with decent quickness at the point, but they've tended to be smaller players like Hepburn. Yeah. This guy's 6'3", and he's strong and he can get up. So it's the kind of player Wisconsin doesn't normally have. I think he's everything I hear, and it's funny. He was a decently regarded basketball recruit, not like, elite, but everything I've read about him seems they are really excited about him. Normally when that happens, I have to assume that the locals have a better read on it than the national guys. And so I'm expecting that he's going to push at least for a high usage reserve role, if not a starter. But it's between those two guys, Hunter and Freitag.
Then you have John Tonje, a 6'5", 225-pound wing, transferring in from Missouri. He had a foot injury. A foot injury? Wow, that's two of them. Missed all but a few games last year. He played 4 years at Colorado State, so another COVID player. He averaged 14.6 points a game and 4.7 rebounds a game, shooting 47, 39, and 81.
Yeah, and I think this is a quietly good portal addition by guard. Because if this guy's healthy, you just write off what happened at Missouri. Sure. He barely played. But that performance at Colorado State, which, Mountain West, solid conference, some part of that probably translates. I think Wisconsin's set with their starters at the wing with Blackwell and Klesmit. So I'd be surprised if Tonje jumps those guys, but I would be equally surprised to not see him play a very significant role off the bench, like at least, 20 minutes. And he fits a little bit of a different role than those two guys at 6'5", 225. That's a big guy, so that's maybe a little bit of the kind of body profile that Storr had that the other two guys don't. So I think he's going to play a significant role even if he's not starting. And to go with that, sometimes you get guys like that and they struggle to shoot. This guy shot 39% from three his last year at Colorado State. So he's demonstrated that it's not all just a power game. It's him.
Then we have Xavier Amos, 6'8", 210-pound transfer from Mac School, Northern Illinois. He still has 2 years of eligibility left. He averaged almost 14 points a game and 6 rebounds a game and a little over 1 block a game, shooting 50, 39, and 65.
Yeah, intriguing player. And with the MAC, we see a lot of MAC guys end up in the Big Ten for obvious reasons because the schools are in the same region for the most part. And I think coaches have a lot of familiarity with these players. That's why you see a lot of those guys transferring up. And it varies. Some of them succeed at a high level and some of them really struggle to translate. I think Amos has a chance, though. I think he's got a great opportunity to become the starter at the 4. Proven shooter. I mean, he shot 39% from 3 on good volume, so that's not a fluky or less reliable number. At 1.3 blocks a game suggests he can give them a little bit of a shot blocking presence, which is not something they typically emphasize, but it would be nice to have. and decent rebounding numbers there too. He's not a bruiser at 210, but I think it's between he and Winter most likely for that starting 4 spot. And I would give Amos a good chance to win that job.
And finally, what makes Ben Johnson at Minnesota upset is Jack Robeson, 6'6" freshman wing from Minnesota. So he'll be a versatile player. They're hoping to contribute a little bit on the wing as well.
Yeah, he's a high energy guy. He's versatile. He's going to be a wing. But you look at Wisconsin and the depth that they've got in the backcourt is pretty strong. And so it's hard for me to imagine this kid getting a significant early role unless something goes wrong on the injury.
And so of the players for Wisconsin, this might be a little bit trickier question. So we always sponsored by the Brothers Suggest You Gutters. Which player do you think our Big Ten team's going to have to keep in the gutter this season?
I'm going to go with John Black.
Okay.
I think he continues to take a jump. It's close because Crone would be a safe pick. But I'm going to go with John Black. I think John Blackwell is going to see a lot more of the ball. And I think he's got the potential to really emerge as, wouldn't surprise me to see him be a 15-point-a-night guy at all.
Well, one of the things that is really nice about my deck is I have the underdecking system, and I don't know if you have one, but if you have a deck, especially in the fall or the spring, it's really nice to have this. Basically, it's a ceiling underneath your deck. It adds a whole nother patio or room to your house. A lot of extra nice dry storage at least. And so if you're thinking about that, the Brothers Suggest You Gutters, they do gutters. Obviously, they do that very well. But if you're interested in underdecking, they can do that as well. It will add a lot of extra square footage to your house, and it's a fantastic way. The nice thing is it gets the water that comes in through your deck. It then is sloped away and it falls outside your house. They can actually put gutters around it too, so it can be collected nicely if you need it to. But anyway, look into that. It's a great option for people who have decks and want to add a little extra storage. I kind of did my own on my house, and it looks like I guess maybe it looked like it was done by someone who doesn't know what they're doing. I guess we'll put it that way. It keeps most of my stuff dry, but not really. So you want to have people who know what they're doing do it. So check out the Brothers Suggest You Gutters. You can find ways to contact them at our support page. And finally, that our contest is, again, with Nudge Printing, our longest sponsor with the show. And Gabe is, as I mentioned before, he has the new hats that are bringing in. And most of the time when you get hats, they actually are just regular blanks. They just stamp on Michigan State logo or whatever. And he was unable to, not given allowed to through licensing agreements to do Michigan State hats. But now that he can. And so he started buying some initially, didn't like them. And so he designed his own. He even said that he spent a lot of time just even working on the diameter of the holes in the back of the hat, so the mesh part of the hat. So there's a lot of custom part of that, vintage and regular sort of modern Michigan State logos that go in the front. They're super cool. Make sure you check them out. When this episode airs, I'm not sure if they'll be available, but you can check it out at Nudge Printing. Go back every day. Make sure you get it. They have really cool stuff on the inside under the brim. It looks kind of like some Spartan camo. They're really, really cool hats. So check it out, Nudge Printing. You get 20% off if you type in Final Four as one word in the coupon code for the checkout. All right, so overall for Wisconsin, you have them ranked here as 13th, so that still makes the Big Ten tournament, but sort of the bottom end of the Big Ten tournament playing on Wednesday. And as with most of these teams, probably if we're going to go from here to probably 6 or even 7, they could go either way. You could be teams where they end up 7th or 13th or vice versa. And this is a team that looks like it's the pieces. Losing AJ Storr is a big loss. He seemed to be a big driver of their performance last year. Without him, can they sort of come back? And then always in the background is what's going on with the guard, and is there more there than just whispers of problems? Is it a real thing, or is it just people who are who kind of like trying to force them out? I never know. Like there are people in the background sometimes just making noise in order to get their guy in. I don't know if that's going on.
Look, it is entirely possible that Wisconsin could even have a top 5 team this year. I mean, it sounds absurd to say about somebody I've got 13th, but it really is true. With all of these teams, there's so much turnover. So we're looking at Wisconsin. You lose Storr, you lose Wall, you lose Hepburn. That's 3 starters. That's a lot of starters to lose. But they're bringing in some interesting new guys. And so how much of that plus improvement internally from guys that are back? I mentioned Blackwell as a guy that I think is set to be better, maybe significantly so. Is Kroll a little better as a 5th-year guy? Klesmet, same thing. Does Nolan Winter take a sophomore year jump? All of those are not crazy long shot possibilities, right? But I think, as with a lot of these teams, it's going to really come down to how effective the newcomers are. Point guard at Wisconsin, I would submit, because of the system they run, is not quite as important as it is most other places in the conference. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter, but their offense is essentially a variant of motion basketball. That's really what it is. And when you play that way, you are not as reliant upon a point guard to initiate everything, And so that's why you don't typically, it's one of the reasons why you don't typically see, even in years where they're really good, you didn't see Wisconsin players at the top of the assist chart, for example, in the Big Ten. It's because it's less dependent upon one guy to do that. So how much does replacing Hepburn matter? Well, it matters. I think it matters more in the overall scheme of what he did, what he could do as a defender, what he could do as a 3-point shooter, which varied in terms of his effectiveness, and then what he did also as a guy who could steady the ship on offense and get them into their stuff effective. You're talking about a transfer up guy who sat out last year and a true freshman. It's the two legitimate candidates for that job. So that's part of why I have them where they are. But would it shock me if Hunter or Freitag or both emerged as at least solid players and the team was better than this? No, it wouldn't shock me. Same kind of thing going on at power forward. They bring in a guy from Northern Illinois who's got some potential. Does all that get realized when he's transferring up? I don't know. So I think there's reason to like this team. And even though where I have them would suggest they're probably not a tournament team this year, I certainly don't rule that out. They from this point forward, we're talking about teams that I think have every reason to believe they're NCAA tournament quality. Some of them might not end up being that, but going into the year, they have every reason to think that they can be that. And Wisconsin would definitely fall into that category. So generally speaking, on the rare occasions where I've picked Wisconsin in a lower end spot like this, they tend to confound.
They prove you wrong, yeah.
And there's been a time or two where the opposite has happened as well. I'm thinking they're probably just on the outside looking in for being that level of team. Because just so much depends on newcomers.
They'd be your preseason Big Ten bubble team.
They'd be one of them, yeah.
Right. All right. Well, make sure you tune in next show when we hit the number 12 team. You'll find out who that is for Rod and his predictions. As a reminder, again, check out our support page at finalfoursontheschedule.com/support. There are ways you can support our sponsors and our show. Also, if you have not ever started making your picks, be prepared, and you can send your picks in to me for our Beat Rod contest. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.